Imagine lying down to sleep, just in your own bed. Your room is locked, the lights are off.
Yeah.
Your head hits the pillow, and within seconds, your biological systems just catastrophically fail.
Right. Total shutdown.
Yeah, exactly. For the next 3 hours, you are clinically, unequivocally dead.
Mm-hmm.
No heartbeat, no brain activity, just a flat line.
But the mind is still going.
Right. But in those same 3 hours, your consciousness doesn't just, fade into a quiet, empty static. Instead, you are violently pulled into a reality that completely defies every known law of physics.
It's an absolute paradigm shift for the person experiencing.
Oh, totally. You experience the absolute, just sensory-crushing depths of hell, and then you're elevated to the hyper-vivid, euphoric heights of heaven. You witness the literal molecular dawn of human creation.
Wow.
And if that wasn't enough, you are handed a highly detailed, geopolitically charged map of the planet's future.
I mean, it really represents the ultimate temporal and sensory paradox,
What do you mean?
Well, on one hand, you have a physical body frozen in a state of clinical death, just lying rigidly on a mattress. But on the other hand, the consciousness purportedly attached to that body is simultaneously processing thousands of years of cosmic history.
Yeah, like an overwhelming volume of spiritual data.
Exactly. The brain is biologically off, yet the mind is supposedly operating at this massive multidimensional capacity.
And then the paradox just collapses. You wake up, your consciousness slams back into your ice-cold physical body.
And this is where it gets incredibly grounded.
Right. You open your eyes, and your immediate, most pressing concern, having literally just witnessed the glory of the universe, is how to frantically flush 5 pounds of illegal marijuana down your toilet.
Yes, before the paramedics standing in your living room call the federal authorities.
It's so wild. The transition from the profoundly divine to the absurdly mundane, it's just staggering.
It creates a narrative whiplash, really. It forces us to examine how human psychology handles the unimaginable when it just crashes right back into gritty, everyday reality.
Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission today is to unpack one of the most incredibly detailed, structurally complex near-death experiences ever recorded.
We're looking at the account of a man named Ivan Tuttle.
Right, pulling from a highly extensive YouTube interview transcript. We're going to explore a story that bridges extreme childhood trauma, hedonistic 1970s disco excess, terrifying spiritual mechanics, and sweeping modern prophecies.
But before we map out this journey, we do need to set the parameters for how we are approaching this material today.
Yes, very important.
Tuttle's account is essentially a collision of intense, uncompromising fundamentalist theology and highly charged modern geopolitics. Later in his account, he makes very specific, polarizing claims regarding the United States, Israel, the Middle East, and Islamic nations.
Which means we need to be completely clear with the listener right from the jump. We're acting strictly as your analytical tour guides through his specific psychological and spiritual landscape.
We are not taking sides.
Exactly. We are not validating his religious doctrines, and we absolutely are not endorsing his political stances. Our sole mission is to dissect the architecture of the story exactly as he presented it in the source material.
Right. Exploring how he connects a near-death experience to international relations. We're analyzing the framework of his vision. We are not declaring it to be universal truth.
So, with that framework established, we can't just jump to the moment his heart stops. To understand how Ivan Tuttle ended up taking a cosmic tour of the spirit realm, we really have to look at the contradictory life that put him in that basement bed in 1978.
It's a psychological progression, really, from the pulpit to the platform shows.
Let's start with the trauma. His early life feels like a pressure cooker designed to just create a schism in his identity. Ivan grows up as a self-described scrawny kid. But the defining physical trait of his childhood is that he was born with a deformed left hand.
And you have to look at his father's background here. His father was a bricklayer, a man whose entire livelihood and self-worth were tied to physical labor, raw masculinity, and an absolute obsession with physical perfection.
You can immediately see the friction there.
Exactly. To a perfectionist whose world is built on the strength of his hands, a son born with a deformed hand is perceived not just as a flaw, but as a personal affront.
Like a disruption to his own image.
Yes, and the father's response to this perceived flaw was severe, relentless physical violence.
Tuttle describes beatings with a belt that were so brutal, so frequent, that he claims nearly every single rib in his back had been broken at some point during his childhood.
Which is horrific.
Just imagine the physiological toll that takes on a developing child. You aren't just living in fear. Your actual skeletal structure is constantly fracturing and healing.
This creates an environment of profound unpredictability and terror. Home is no longer a sanctuary, it's a war zone. So a child in that environment naturally seeks a counterbalance, right? A place of safety.
And for Ivan, that sanctuary became the church.
He describes the church as his only safe haven. He gravitated toward God because the structure of the church represented the absolute antithesis of his father.
Right, it offered authority and rules, but without the chaotic physical violence.
That makes total sense. He wanted to become a minister because he viewed preaching as the ultimate expression of love and safety. It was the loudest way to reject the fear he lived with at home.
But then the dynamic shifts dramatically. Ivan turns 14. His massive bricklayer father approaches him to deliver another beating, and Ivan just snaps.
He doesn't cower this time.
No. He stands up, looks his father dead in the eye, and tells him, "If you hit me one more time, I will kill you."
It is a critical pivot point in his psychological development, and the father, faced with this sudden lethal boundary, actually backs down.
Really?
Yeah, he smiles slightly, shakes his head, and walks away. He never lays a hand on Ivan again.
Wow.
And the universe seems to underscore this victory because shortly after that confrontation, the father, who is only 40 years old, by the way, suffers a massive heart attack.
Oh my gosh.
It turns out he had an undiagnosed congenital heart disease. He survives for another 16 years, but he is completely physically incapacitated.
So he can't work.
Right, and more importantly for Ivan, he can no longer inflict violence. The physical threat is entirely neutralized.
Which leaves Ivan totally free to pursue his sanctuary, so he packs up and heads to Faith School of Theology in Maine. He has absolutely no money to his name, so he pays his tuition through sheer manual labor on the school's farm.
Waking up before dawn, right?
Oh yeah. Milking cows, cleaning out stalls, slopping pigs, and he's fighting this crippling social anxiety.
Right, he was incredibly shy.
He tells this heartbreaking story about being so terrified to speak in front of a 10th grade class that he literally lost control of his bladder, wet himself, and fled the school building.
The contrast between that level of paralyzing fear and his eventual career is remarkable because he pushes through the anxiety. He practices projecting his voice.
He really works at it.
Yeah, and in doing so, he discovers he possesses this booming, commanding presence when he steps behind a pulpit. He falls in love with the power of his own voice. He's entirely on track to fulfill this lifelong dream of entering the ministry.
Until a single, seemingly trivial interaction just completely derails his entire life trajectory.
Right, the Christmas break.
Yeah. It's the Christmas break of his 19th year. He flies home and goes to a local department store with his dad, a place called the GMS store, the government employee membership store. He walks up to the pharmacy counter and strikes up a conversation with a pretty pharmacist.
It sounds like an innocuous everyday moment, but consider the context of Ivan's environment here.
Okay, lay it out for us.
He's been raised in an ultra-strict, fundamentalist culture. He is attending a holiness college where long sleeves are mandatory, where interactions with the opposite sex are heavily regulated.
So he's completely sheltered.
Exactly. He is entirely unequipped to handle female attention. This simple flirtation triggers a massive psychological rebellion. The pendulum swings with violent force.
He abandons his faith, drops out of Bible college entirely, and just walks away from the only sanctuary he ever knew.
It is a staggering self-sabotage.
By the time he turns 21, he goes from being a teetotaling, devout Bible student to drinking alcohol and smoking pot for the very first time on his actual birthday.
And the escalation is rapid.
Oh, yeah. He doesn't just dabble in rebellion, he mainlines it. He quickly graduates from pot to snorting crystal meth and cocaine.
And his rationalization is wild.
He claims it helps him work a little bit better.
This reveals a core component of his personality. Ivan Tuttle does nothing halfway. Whether he's pursuing religious purity or secular hedonism, he operates at the absolute extreme of the spectrum.
And this intensity eventually funnels into a career in car sales for General Motors. And this is where his background in ministry collides with his new secular lifestyle in a truly bizarre way.
He becomes an absolute legend on the showroom floor.
Yes. He sets dealership records, moving 30 to 35 cars a single month. In 1977 and 1978, he is pulling in over $100,000 a year.
Which is astronomical for that time.
Adjusting for inflation, that is a massive, massive income for a young guy in his 20s. and his secret weapon. He takes a foundational principle he learned in Bible college, radical, uncompromising honesty, and he weaponizes it to close deals.
He claims his entire sales strategy was just telling the truth. No sleazy tactics, no hidden fees, no lying about the condition of the vehicles, just blunt, radical honesty.
Which is brilliant.
It is. It's an almost cynical irony. He strips a core spiritual virtue entirely of its religious context and applies it purely as a mechanism for material wealth.
It's the perfect metaphor for his life at this stage. He takes the tools of the sanctuary and uses them to build a monument to his own ego. And the way he spends this money is the ultimate 1970s fever dream.
The disco era.
He is living at the club, unbuttoned silk shirts with puffy sleeves, disco dancing every single night.
And the shoes. We have to talk about the shoes.
Because he is insecure about his height, he's only 5.5 inches tall. He wears customized 6-inch platform shoes, just to prop himself up to 6'4" on the dance floor.
The visual is striking, isn't it? It is a literal physical elevation of the self. He is artificially inflating his stature, fueled by a dangerous cocktail of ego, extreme wealth, and narcotics.
And inevitably, this level of excess attracts darker opportunities.
Right. A contact at the nightclub observes his reckless spending and pitches him a shadow financing scheme.
Okay, how does it work?
If Ivan puts up $5,000 in trust money, this contact will use it to smuggle large quantities of drugs across the border from Belize and disperse them throughout the United States.
And Ivan's internal justification for funding an international drug ring is just a wild piece of mental gymnastics.
How does he rationalize it?
He tells himself, well, the cops can't bust me. I'm not the one driving the product or doing the street dealing. They're taking all the physical risk.
Wow.
He completely divorces himself from the moral and legal reality of his actions. Suddenly, this former Bible college student is a shadow financier pulling in kilos of pure cocaine for his own personal consumption.
He has constructed an impenetrable fortress around his life. He has wealth, he has elevated social status at the clubs, he has an endless supply of narcotics.
And a literal fortress, too.
Yes. His apartment is in a basement equipped with iron bars over the window wells and 3 heavy padlocks on the primary door. It is designed specifically to protect his massive stash of illegal drugs.
He's totally insulated from the world.
He genuinely believes he is invincible.
But that illusion of invincibility shatters violently, and it happens right in the middle of a disco. It's February 1978. Ivan is out dancing, wearing his massive platform shoes, and suddenly he is struck by an agonizing, paralyzing pain deep inside the muscle of his left calf.
And his initial reaction?
He brushes it off. He assumes he just caught a bad Charlie horse from dancing in high heels.
He attempts to self-medicate, smoking pot to force himself to sleep through the pain, but it only intensifies over the next few days. The leg begins to swell and discolor.
So finally, the agony overrides his stubbornness, and he visits the doctor.
And the physician examines the leg and delivers a very serious diagnosis: thrombophlebitis.
Right.
This is an inflammatory process that causes a blood clot to form and block one or more veins, usually in your legs. It is a deep vein thrombosis.
Which is a massive medical emergency. But Ivan's reaction is basically a dark comedy of errors wrapped in pure hubris.
What does he do?
Well, the doctor, who Ivan describes as having a heavy accent, gives him the diagnosis. Ivan mishears the word thrombophlebitis and thinks the doctor is saying trombone.
No way.
Yes. He literally laughs in the physician's face. He tells the doctor, blood clots are for old people. I'm a young man. And he just walks out of the clinic.
That decision is breathtakingly dangerous. A deep vein thrombosis is not a localized issue. The primary danger is that the blood clot will break loose from the calf muscle, travel through the bloodstream, and lodge in the lungs, creating a pulmonary embolism.
Which is usually fatal.
Fatal within minutes. His body was flashing the most severe red warning lights possible, and his ego prompted him to simply unplug the alarm.
Well, eventually, the pain becomes so debilitating that he can no longer walk, forcing him to check into the hospital. He is confined to a hospital bed for 10 straight days.
10 days of enforced, miserable sobriety.
No alcohol, no cocaine, no disco, just a grueling medical intervention to thin his blood and dissolve the clot. Finally, the doctors believe the immediate danger has passed, and they clear him to return home.
So he returns to his padlocked basement fortress. He invites a girl over to cook dinner for him. And consider the absolute reckless compulsion here. The very first thing he does, having just spent 10 days receiving intensive medical care to save his life from a blood clot, is light up a joint.
He takes a single sip of liquor, decides it tastes absolutely vile to him,
Yeah.
and then right around 9:00 p.m., he turns to the girl and says he feels incredibly strange.
Not just nauseous, but fundamentally wrong.
Yeah. He walks into his bedroom, lies down on his bed, and the exact fraction of a second his head touches the pillow, he dies.
The clinical biological narrative abruptly terminates in that bedroom. And according to Ivan, the spiritual narrative instantaneously takes over.
There is no gentle fading of consciousness.
No floating above the bed looking down in confusion. No stereotypical tunnel of warm white light. The transition is described as a violent, hostile extraction.
He claims a demonic entity materializes, grabs him by his left wrist, which, by the way, feels incredibly symbolically significant, given that it's the side of his deformed hand and the side of his blood clot, and yanks him physically up and out of his mattress like a ragdoll.
This introduces a foundational mechanical concept in his vision, something we can call instant omniscience.
Right, let's unpack that.
In Tuttle's theological framework, the human spirit is an eternal entity that never requires sleep. Our physical bodies need rest, and our physical brains act as a biological filter, severely limiting the amount of information our consciousness can access at any given moment.
So the brain holds us back.
Yes. But the second biological death occurs, that fleshy filter is entirely removed.
It makes me think of the human brain like a dial-up modem from the 1990s trying to download the entire internet. It can only process a few kilobytes of data at a time, buffering constantly.
That's a great analogy.
Tuttle is suggesting that at the moment of death, the modem is bypassed completely. Your consciousness is suddenly hardwired directly into the fiber optic mainframe of the universe.
You don't learn anything new, you just suddenly contain all knowledge.
He says within 5 seconds, he knew everything. He knew his body was dead on the bed. He knew the terrifying entity holding his wrist was a demon. And he knew with absolute crushing certainty that his destination was hell.
Yet, even as this cosmic omniscience washes over him, the residual instincts of his physical life fire off one final, desperate defense mechanism.
Oh, this part is crazy.
Ivan had 14 years of rigorous martial arts training. His immediate knee-jerk reaction to being grabbed by a hostile entity is to clench his fist and throw a devastating punch right at the demon's head.
I can just picture this guy out of his body trying to roundhouse kick a demon, which of course does absolutely nothing.
Precisely. The laws of physical mass and kinetic energy have evaporated. He tries to reach out and flip the physical light switch on his bedroom wall, and his hand phases directly through the drywall.
He realizes he is now entirely subjugated to the laws of spiritual physics.
And spiritual physics, particularly on the descent into the underworld, are designed for maximum horror.
The demon begins dragging him downward toward the center of hell. The way Ivan describes the architecture and the sensory environment of this place is just overwhelming.
The sensory details are meticulously designed to convey a state of absolute, unmitigated agony. He describes a suffocating pitch blackness, yet paradoxically, his spiritual vision allows him to see the horrors clearly.
And the heat, right?
He experiences an intense roasting heat. Though he specifically knows a fascinating detail, he never actually saw a literal flickering flame.
That is interesting. And the smell he describes an atmosphere thick with the stench of burning human flesh, mixed with rotting garbage, raw sewage, and raw sulfur.
A smell that doesn't just hit his nose, but permeates his entire spiritual essence.
And the environmental horror is compounded by a terrifying biological reality, or rather the lack of one.
The lack of passing out.
Yes. Ivan explains that in our physical bodies, we have a built-in mercy mechanism. If physical pain reaches an intolerable threshold, the brain initiates a failsafe. We pass out. We lose consciousness to escape the agony.
But a spirit is engineered for eternity. It cannot pass out. Therefore, it is forced to continuously, endlessly endure every single microsecond of agony without ever losing awareness.
That is perhaps the most horrifying concept in his entire account. It strips away the only biological defense mechanism humans possess against extreme suffering.
The inhabitants of this realm are described as dangling, suspended in the dark space, seemingly bound by invisible constraints, entirely unable to pull away from the demonic entities that are constantly tearing at their spiritual forms.
The screaming is just a continuous deafening roar. But the torment isn't just physical. There is a deeply psychological layer to this punishment that he refers to as telepathic guilt.
And this is where the concept of instant omniscience becomes weaponized.
Exactly. The omniscience works against the souls trapped there. As Ivan is dragged through the outskirts of this realm, passing by billions of tormented souls, he begins making involuntary, instant telepathic connections with them.
Without a single word being spoken, he instantly downloads every intimate, embarrassing, malicious, and dark secret of their earthly lives.
And the horrific flip side is that they instantly download all of his. Every single lie, every theft, every selfish thought, the drug smuggling, the excess, it is all instantaneously broadcast to billions of screaming strangers.
It is the complete and total annihilation of privacy, weaponized as a form of eternal psychological torture.
And as he absorbs this telepathic data, he begins recognizing people. This is where Tuttle's specific theological worldview comes into incredibly sharp focus.
He claims that among the tormented, he recognized the faces of famous earthly pastors, prominent evangelists, and supposed prophets.
He specifically points out a well-known, corrupt English minister who preached righteousness every Sunday while secretly living a life of financial theft and abuse behind closed doors.
And this observation leads him to tackle one of the most hotly debated theological controversies within the Christian faith.
Right. Ivan says he was absolutely stunned to realize there were more people burning in hell who ascribed to the doctrine of once saved, always saved, than he saw followers of Buddhism or Hinduism.
The doctrine he is attacking here is formally known as eternal security. It is the belief held by many denominations that once a person genuinely accepts salvation and grace, their spiritual status is permanently locked in.
So they can't lose it.
Exactly. They cannot lose their salvation, regardless of how far they stray or what actions they commit later in life.
But Tuttle violently dismantles this in his vision. He insists that continuous unrepentant sin leads directly to hell, full stop.
He defines repentance not as a simple emotional apology, but as a literal behavioral 180-degree turn. You must walk in the opposite direction of the sin.
He's basically looking at the listener and saying, you cannot use a past emotional altar call as a spiritual get-out-of-jail-free card if you are currently running a shadow financing drug ring.
And he claims the people in hell who believed this doctrine were telepathically screaming at him, desperately begging him to return to Earth and warn their families that eternal security is a massive, damning lie.
However, this strictly mechanical, uncompromising framework leads to some profoundly, deeply unsettling conclusions. The spiritual law, he describes, operates without nuance.
Which brings us to one of the most difficult portions of the transcript, the story of the 18-year-old atheist girl.
I really struggled with this section, and I think we need to unpack it carefully. Ivan claims he saw a young 18-year-old girl who had just been killed by a drunk driver while she was driving home from college.
Right.
And he asserts that she went straight to hell for one reason: her parents raised her in an atheist household. According to the telepathic download, the only time she had ever even heard the concept of God was in passing at a childhood sleepover.
Her mother supposedly even cried out to God by her hospital bed as the doctors unplugged the life support, but it was too late for the daughter.
I have to stop here. A teenager is killed by a drunk driver, and she is eternally punished in unimaginable agony simply because of the ideological environment her parents created for her. She never even had the agency or exposure to make a conscious choice. How does his narrative square that with any concept of divine justice?
It is a harsh, deeply unsettling conclusion, but it forces us to look closely at the underlying mechanics of his specific theological framework.
How does he justify it?
In Tuttle's vision, spiritual law does not function on human empathy or mitigating circumstances. It operates mechanically, much like the law of gravity. If you step off a building, gravity doesn't care if you were pushed, if you slipped, or if you simply didn't understand how gravity worked. You fall.
So ignorance isn't an excuse.
In his theology, ignorance of the law or lack of exposure does not suspend the spiritual consequences. The requirement for salvation is a binary switch, and if it isn't flipped before death, the destination is fixed.
It paints a picture of a universe that is incredibly rigid and brutally unforgiving.
It does, and this is why we must reiterate our analytical boundary. We are exploring Tuttle's specific fundamentalist theology here, which attributes extreme, eternal spiritual consequences to parental upbringing and lack of exposure.
We are dissecting how his framework operates. We are not verifying it as a universal moral truth or endorsing its depiction of justice.
Exactly. And this rigid, punitive framework extends directly into his views on secular media and technology as well.
Oh, the video games. Remember, the year he dies is 1978. Arcades are just starting to become popular. Pac-Man and Space Invaders are about to explode into the culture.
And Ivan claims he saw demonic entities in hell literally salivating, waiting with eager anticipation for the release of upcoming video games.
He argues that the demons viewed this emerging technology as the ultimate Trojan horse. The mechanics, as he describes them, are insidious. The games provide instant, hollow satisfaction and distract the youth from spiritual pursuits.
But more dangerously, he claims that the simulated violence of the games lingers in the player's mind long after the screen is turned off.
In his view, this lingering mental imagery creates a receptive psychological environment, a fertile ground for demonic influence to take root. He draws a direct causal line from 1978 arcade games to the epidemic of modern mass killings we see today.
It is an extreme application of spiritual warfare mapped onto the dawn of the digital age.
So Ivan is absorbing all of this horrifying data. The telepathic guilt, the rigid theology, and the demon dragging him is finally maneuvering him to the precipice, preparing to cast him into his permanent designated place of eternal torment.
But right at the very edge of the abyss, the mechanics of this spiritual universe offer an unexpected loophole.
Just as the demon prepares to throw him, a booming, overwhelmingly powerful voice echoes across the darkness of hell.
The voice commends the entity, stating, "You must let him go. It is not his time. I made a promise to his mother."
And the demon, the same entity that Ivan couldn't even phase with a full-force karate punch, is instantly petrified by the sound of this voice. It drops Ivan's wrist immediately and cowers in absolute terror.
Let's contextualize the mechanics of this rescue. Why did this voice, which is heavily implied to be God, intervene at the final possible second?
Tuttle provides the backstory. His mother had faithfully prayed for his salvation 2 to 3 times a day, every single day, for 26 and a half years.
He actually does the math during the interview.
Yeah, he calculates that his mother prayed for him over 22,000 individual times. And she didn't just offer generic prayers. She anchored those prayers to a specific biblical promise.
The scripture about training up a child.
Right. She claimed the scripture that says, if you train up a child in the way he should go, when he is old, he will not depart from it. She demanded God honor that promise, ensuring none of her children would go to hell. And God supposedly honored that staggering volume of intercession.
It introduces a fascinating concept of transactional spiritual currency. In this narrative, the mother's sustained faith, combined with the sheer unrelenting volume of her prayers, created a literal impenetrable barrier in the spirit realm.
This barrier was so powerful that it overrode Ivan's own hedonistic choices, his drug dealing, and even the demonic entity's claim on his soul.
So he is dropped by the demon, and in the literal blink of an eye, the absolute darkness vanishes.
The transition is instantaneous. He is suddenly standing at the gates of heaven, and the first thing he encounters is an angel of staggering proportions.
Just massive.
Ivan says the angel's hand was so huge that when Ivan reached out to hold it, he felt like a tiny toddler, barely able to wrap his arms around just 2 fingers of a giant adult.
The angel immediately informs him of a caveat. He tells Ivan that he is not allowed to stay in heaven permanently. He must return to his physical body on earth, drastically alter his life, and fulfill a purpose.
But Ivan, having just spent an undetermined amount of time dangling over the screaming abyss of hell, is having none of it.
He refuses to go back.
He essentially death grips the angel's giant fingers and absolutely refuses to let go as the angel begins to give him a tour of the realm.
And as he takes in this new environment, Ivan draws a profound philosophical contrast between hell and heaven, centering it entirely on a single human emotion, hope.
It is a very astute psychological observation. He notes that in hell, the physical torture, while agonizing, isn't actually the worst part.
The true horror of hell is the total, absolute absence of hope.
Because hope, by definition, requires the possibility of a future change. Because hell is a static, eternal state of suffering, hope cannot exist there. The psychological crush of knowing things will never ever improve is the ultimate torment.
Right, but then he looks around heaven and he realizes there is no hope there either, but for the exact opposite reason.
You don't need hope in heaven because every single desire, every need, every longing is instantly and perfectly fulfilled. When you remove the need for hope, the resulting emotional state is pure, unadulterated euphoria.
The physical topography and the architecture he describes to match this euphoria are incredibly vivid. He sees giant, sprawling buildings constructed of flawless marble, laced heavily with silver, gold, diamonds, and rubies.
It is a city of unimaginable opulence. But the detail that fascinated me the most was his description of the light.
The light of God's glory.
Yes, the light in heaven isn't coming from a localized source like a sun or a star. He claims the light is literally the physical manifestation of God in the glory. And because it emanates from everywhere at once, it casts absolutely zero shadows. Nothing is obscured.
Furthermore, when he walks inside one of these massive marble buildings, the light doesn't stop at the walls. It passes directly through the solid stone and through the spiritual bodies of the people.
This is a recurring and fascinating motif in near-death experience literature. The perception of divine light, not merely as illumination, but as a physical, permeating substance that sustains the environment.
And then he observes the inhabitants of this light. Tuttle notes that everyone he sees in heaven appears to be in the absolute prime of their physical existence. He estimates they all look to be around 30 to 33 years old.
But there's an incredible psychological twist to how you perceive people. He says that when you encounter a loved one in heaven, you initially perceive them at the exact age you expect to see them.
Imagine your own grandparents for a second. In your mind's eye, are they 80 years old sitting in a rocking chair? Or are they 30 years old and full of energy?
Tuttle is suggesting that heaven bends its physical reality to match your specific psychological comfort. If your grandfather died in his 80s, you might see him as an energetic young man, but your brain instantly overrides the visual discrepancy and recognizes him perfectly as the grandfather you knew.
If a parent loses a child at age 12, they will initially perceive that child at that exact developmental stage.
He is describing a realm where perception actively shapes reality in order to provide the maximum possible emotional comfort to the observer.
This concept is deeply highlighted when he describes an area dedicated to children. He witnesses a massive, joyous area filled with playing children.
The angel explains that these are aborted babies, stillborn children, and children who died before reaching an age of accountability.
Ivan actually experiences this personally. He meets his own sister, who was stillborn when he was just 6 years old.
And he claims that these children are waiting there in a state of absolute happiness for their earthly parents to eventually arrive so they can experience the joys of heaven together.
And going back to that instant omniscience concept, he notes that because the brain and spirit are instantly connected upon death, even an infant spirit possesses full, mature, adult-level knowledge and understanding, despite appearing as a child.
During this tour, he also describes encountering Jesus, who is walking casually among the crowds of people. The physical description he provides is highly specific and striking. He says Jesus glows with a warm, calming fire, and that his eyes are multicolored, shifting like a rainbow.
And we have to talk about his description of the angels because Ivan completely shatters centuries of Renaissance art tropes here.
He emphatically states that the vast majority of angels do not have wings. He says, wings are essentially an earthly assignment, feature a functional tool for certain tasks, not a standard biological necessity for spiritual beings in their home realm.
He categorizes the angelic hierarchy based on his observations. He notes guardian angels, who often look remarkably similar to the humans they are assigned to protect. There are helper angels who facilitate tasks within heaven.
And then there are the archangels, massive beings of immense power who only appear on Earth when a major world-altering geopolitical or spiritual event is about to occur.
I found his take on worship music to be absolutely fascinating.
Oh, this was wild. He claims that when humans play earthly worship music, angels are literally drawn to the location. They flock to it because they love the sound, while demonic entities are repulsed by it and flee the area.
It treats music not just as art, but as spiritual physics, a literal, measurable frequency that physically repels or attracts multidimensional entities based on its resonance.
It is a concept that takes the highly ethereal and grounds it into practical, everyday advice for his followers. He encourages people to play worship music continuously in their homes as a mechanism to physically alter the spiritual atmosphere and create a perimeter against negative entities.
So Ivan is experiencing this incredible euphoric tour. He is reunited with family, he is learning the physics of light and music.
But the tour is abruptly cut short. The giant angel instructs Ivan to turn around and look behind him. And when he does, the opulent marble buildings of heaven vanish, and he is suddenly staring at a sprawling, multidimensional, real-time timeline of Earth's entire history from beginning to end.
This transition moves the narrative away from a personal afterlife journey and into the realm of cosmic history. He claims to witness the events of Genesis playing out before him, but his vision injects highly specific, unorthodox details into the traditional biblical text.
He sees the early Earth as a dark, formless, watery blob. And then he watches as God physically reaches out and touches the water, charging it with his divine glory.
And this leads to a massive, highly controversial claim. Tuttle insists that because God physically touched the water at the exact dawn of creation, his divine glory never left it.
He claims that every single ounce of water on Earth today still retains that original dormant divine charge.
He attempts to validate this by pointing out that water is mentioned 722 times in the Bible, which is more frequently than concepts like prayer or worship. But more interestingly, he connects this theological vision to the highly controversial theories of Dr. Masaru Emoto.
Emoto was a Japanese researcher who gained fame in the 1990s and 2000s for claiming that human consciousness, spoken words, and music could physically alter the molecular structure of water. He argued that water has memory.
Right, Emoto's experiments involved exposing glasses of water to positive words like love or negative words like hate, and then freezing the water. He claimed the loved water formed beautiful, symmetrical ice crystals, while the hated water formed ugly, asymmetrical blobs.
Science has largely debunked it as pseudoscience due to lack of controlled variables. But Ivan takes this fringe theory and completely retrofits it into fundamentalist theology.
That is precisely what he does. It is a fascinating synthesis of fundamentalist religion and elemental pseudoscience. Because of this vision, Ivan now insists on baptizing people in massive, heated pools rather than standard church fonts.
He gets into the water first, quietly asks God to activate the dormant glory that has been resting in the water since Genesis. And he claims this activation results in extreme, undeniable spiritual manifestations, people being instantly healed of physical ailments, or demonic entities screaming and violently leaving people's bodies the moment they touch the water.
It's almost like he is treating the water as a highly volatile spiritual battery that just needs the right energetic frequency to discharge.
From the charging of the water, he watches the timeline move forward to the creation of humanity. He sees Adam formed from the dust of the earth.
And here's where the instant omniscience concept applies to biology.
When God breathes the spirit into Adam, his brain and spirit connect instantaneously. Adam does not wake up as a helpless infant trapped in a fully grown man's body. He possesses full encyclopedic knowledge and complex language the very second he opens his eyes.
And Tuttle specifies a detail about that language. He claims the original language spoken in Eden was not Hebrew, as some traditions suggest. It was the language of heaven, a complex, cosmic dialect that even Satan understands fluently.
He then watches Eve being formed from Adam's rib, receiving the exact same breath of life and instant omniscience. And Ivan makes a claim here that really bucks traditional theology.
He asserts that Adam and Eve lived in the Garden of Eden for a very, very long time. He even claims they actually had children while still living in the garden long before the fall, which is definitively not in the standard Genesis text.
This is a prime example of how visionary experiences often attempt to fill in the perceived blanks or logistical gaps of ancient narratives.
And nowhere is this more evident than in his explanation of the fall of man. We are all familiar with the story of the serpent deceiving Eve, but Tuttle adds a deeply psychological layer to this event.
He claims the serpent wasn't just a random talking snake that happened to slither by. He says the serpent was Eve's absolute favorite, most beloved pet animal in the entire garden.
Which is such a wild, devastating detail. It completely rewrites the emotional dynamic of the scene. Lucifer doesn't just show up as a deceptive stranger. He actively possesses Eve's most trusted, beloved companion in order to exploit her inherent trust.
It adds a profound layer of emotional betrayal and psychological manipulation to the concept of original sin.
It frames the deception as an intimately personal attack rather than a philosophical debate. When they ultimately eat the fruit, Tuttle says the physical and spiritual corruption is instantaneous.
They immediately lose their physical immortality, the cellular process of decay begins in their bodies, and their instant omniscience is flooded with the sudden, crushing awareness of their own nakedness, vulnerability, and shame. Sin fundamentally and permanently alters human nature.
The timeline in his vision then fast-forwards through the entirety of the Old Testament events. Ivan says he saw clearly but didn't have the time to detail in the interview.
The timeline finally slows down and becomes visceral again at the crucifixion of Jesus.
He describes the crucifixion in brutal, three-dimensional, agonizing detail. He watches the Roman soldiers utilize a cat o' nine tails, literally ripping the flesh from the side of Jesus' body. He witnesses the crown of thorns being violently driven deep into his scalp.
And he is incredibly adamant about one very specific historical detail regarding the crucifixion.
The placement of the nails.
Over the last century, many historians, medical experts, and theologians have argued that the Romans likely drove the crucifixion nails through the wrists because the anatomical structure of the hands couldn't support the weight of a hanging human body without tearing through the flesh.
But Ivan pushes back against this modern consensus aggressively. He says, I can only tell you what I saw, and he insists, without a shadow of a doubt, that he watched the Roman soldiers drive the massive iron spikes directly through the palms of the hands.
He also emphasizes the theological mechanics of the crucifixion event. In his view, the cross wasn't merely a mechanism for the forgiveness of human sins, it was fundamentally a transfer of authority.
By dying, Jesus legally and spiritually passed his divine authority directly to humanity, empowering believers with the legal right to perform the exact same miracles he did, healing the sick, controlling the elements, and casting out demons.
It's essentially the ultimate democratization of divine power. But then, the timeline shifts away from ancient history. It zooms past his current year of 1978 and vaults directly into the future.
And this is where Ivan's vision pivots sharply from historical theology into highly specific, geopolitically charged modern prophecies.
Let's start with his predictions for the church in the United States. He foresees a massive, unprecedented global outpouring of the Holy Spirit. Interestingly, he strongly and repeatedly rejects the traditional term revival to describe this event.
Yeah, he has a great quote about this. He says, "If it needs reviving, that means you let it die. Don't let it die again."
He doesn't view this upcoming era as a temporary spike in religious enthusiasm. He views it as a sustained, permanent elevation of spiritual power across the globe.
For the United States specifically, he predicts that Bible reading and organized prayer will legally and culturally return to U.S. public schools.
He also outlines a prophecy concerning the U.S. government, predicting an 18 to 19-year period of intense, undeniable spiritual awakening within the halls of power.
He claims we will see senators, Congress members, and high-level officials experiencing radical conversions and being filled with the Holy Spirit in unprecedented numbers, fundamentally altering the trajectory of American legislation.
And to validate these future claims for the listener, Ivan points to things he saw on that timeline in 1978 that he says have already come true in our modern era.
For example, he mentions seeing massive, unexplained holes suddenly opening up in the frozen earth of Russia.
And he points out that in 2014, scientists actually did discover giant, mysterious sinkholes appearing across the Siberian tundra, likely due to methane gas explosions.
He also claims he saw major rivers in China turning completely blood red, an ecological phenomenon that actually made international news headlines around 2020.
But from there, the prophecies move heavily and exclusively into the realm of modern international relations. He urges his audience to closely monitor the geopolitical actions of Russia, Syria, China, and Iran.
He makes a bold prediction that within a 7-year window, unprecedented, unbelievable spiritual miracles will occur within the borders of Iran, fundamentally shaking the nation.
And then he makes some incredibly polarized, definitive statements about the Middle East as a whole. He claims that the global population is being fed constant, coordinated lies originating out of the region.
He specifically states that Islamic nations are actively indoctrinating their children from the moment of birth to possess a deep-seated hatred for Christians and Jews.
And he goes as far as to boldly claim that Israel is the, quote, only nation telling the truth in the Middle East.
This is where we need to reiterate our boundaries as analysts. As we observe the history of prophetic visions, we frequently see a blurring of the line between perceived spiritual, eternal truths and the visionary's own contemporary political anxieties and cultural worldview.
Right. To you, our listener, these specific statements regarding Israel, Iran, and systemic Islamic indoctrination are entirely the claims of Ivan Tuttle, drawn directly from the source text of his interview.
We are exploring how his narrative connects a spiritual near-death experience to modern international relations, absolutely without endorsing, validating, or condemning his political stances. We are simply reporting the contents of his vision impartially.
Exactly. We are just reading the map he provided and exploring how his mind categorized the future. He concludes this section by claiming that a global Great Awakening is rapidly approaching, an era where these alleged geopolitical lies will be exposed and the global population's eyes will be open to the absolute truth of these conflicts.
It is a staggering, almost incomprehensible amount of information to process. In the span of roughly 3 Earth hours, this man claims to have experienced the absolute horrors of hell, the euphoric glories of heaven, the molecular creation of the universe, the betrayal in Eden, the brutality of the crucifixion, and the complex political future of the 21st century.
And after absorbing all of that, it is finally time for him to wake up. But before his consciousness is sent back to his body, he receives one final, deeply personal vision.
The vision of his father.
He sees his father, the man who beat him mercilessly, lying in a hospital bed. His father sits up, points a trembling finger directly at Ivan and shouts, "I did it to you. I did it to you."
The giant angel steps in to explain this cryptic vision. He tells Ivan that this represents a generational curse. Specifically, it represents the hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, the congenital thickening of the heart muscle that killed his father and theoretically threatens Ivan.
The angel informs Ivan that because of the spiritual authority he is returning with, he now has the power to permanently break this physical genetic curse off his bloodline forever.
So, armed with cosmic knowledge and spiritual authority, his consciousness descends back to his padlocked basement apartment.
And the reality of the scene he returns to is almost comically chaotic, a stark contrast to the majesty of heaven. It has been 3 hours since he died.
The girl he had invited over panicked when he stopped breathing and called the operator. Paramedics have breached his fortress and are currently standing over his lifeless body.
Ivan claims he watches this scene from above, hovering near the ceiling. He watches a paramedic reach down and touch his face, then shake his head in defeat.
Tuttle later learned a fascinating medical fact that aligns with this moment. Rigor mortis, the stiffening of the body's muscles after death, typically sets into the smaller facial muscles first, right around the 2-hour mark.
The paramedic feels the rigid, stiffened face, assumes Ivan is long dead and beyond resuscitation, and walks out of the bedroom to call the county morgue.
As soon as the paramedic walks back into the room and pulls the bed covers back to prepare the body, Ivan's consciousness slams violently back into his physical form.
He describes this sensation as excruciating. His body felt ice cold, frozen stiff, and he felt as though thousands of volts of electricity were shooting through his veins as his biological systems forcefully rebooted.
He opens his eyes, and his very first word is a strained, croaking gasp of no.
He absolutely terrifies the paramedics. They physically jump back in shock. They immediately start insisting they need to load him into the ambulance and take him to the hospital for intensive care.
But Ivan, who is barely able to move his stiffened legs, still freezing cold from clinical death, is suddenly hit with a massive, overwhelming wave of earthly panic.
He remembers the 3 padlocks on the door. He remembers the girl who is still standing in the apartment. And most importantly, he remembers the 3 kilos of pure cocaine and the 5 pounds of marijuana sitting entirely unprotected in his living room.
He just saw the literal glory of God and the terrifying depths of hell, but right in this exact moment, his most pressing, visceral terror is the thought of going to federal prison for drug trafficking.
And is the ultimate grounding moment. It takes this massive, sweeping cosmic tale and anchors it in a hyper-realistic, gritty, flawed human moment. Using sheer adrenaline, he desperately forces the bewildered paramedics and the terrified girl out of his apartment.
He locks the heavy padlocks behind them and physically stumbles, freezing and weak, into his bathroom to destroy the evidence.
And it unfolds like a scene straight out of a tense mob movie, but completely undermined by absurd practical difficulties. He rips open the kilos of cocaine and dumps them into the toilet, which flushes down relatively easily. But then he is faced with the 5 pounds of marijuana.
And he notes a very frustrating, highly inconvenient law of physics. Pot floats.
He cannot just flush it. He has to frantically wet wads of toilet paper, shove them into the bowl on top of the marijuana, and force it down the drain, handful by handful.
It is an incredibly tedious, panic-inducing, physically demanding task for a man whose heart was literally stopped 5 minutes ago.
Once the drugs are finally gone and the immediate threat of prison is neutralized, the adrenaline completely leaves his body. The true crushing weight of what he just experienced over the last 3 hours collapses on him.
He walks slowly into his living room and sits down next to this little mundane avocado green rocking chair.
He grabs 2 rolls of toilet paper because, as he humorously notes, he's a single bachelor and doesn't own a box of Kleenex, and he just completely breaks down.
He cries continuously, uncontrollably from that moment until 6:30 in the morning. He begs God for forgiveness, and he initiates repentance exactly as he learned it in his vision, a complete, total 180-degree behavioral turn.
He abandons his lucrative job at the dealership. He abandons his extravagant lifestyle, the disco clubs, the drinking, the heavy drugs, the women. He walks away from all of it instantly and permanently.
But the craziest part is that he doesn't tell a single soul why he changed so drastically. Before he left heaven, the giant angel had given him a strict, binding command. You must not tell anybody about this experience until either I appear to you again or God speaks to you himself and releases you.
And Ivan honored that vow of silence completely. He did not speak a single word of this 3-hour cosmic journey to anyone for 35 years.
Which adds a layer of profound, quiet endurance to the entire narrative. Imagine the psychological burden. He carried the vivid memories of the horrors of hell, the euphoric light of heaven, the mechanics of creation, and the geopolitical future of the world entirely locked inside his own head, completely silently, for over 3 decades, before finally writing his book and participating in interviews like the one we've analyzed today.
It is an absolutely exhausting, awe-inspiring narrative to track. We've gone from extreme childhood physical trauma to a 14-year-old bravely standing up to his abuser. We've analyzed the cynical weaponization of radical honesty in a General Motors car dealership, the platform shoes of 1970s disco excess, and a tragic, nearly fatal medical misunderstanding over the word trombone.
We have traversed a deeply uncompromising, terrifying vision of hell, where spiritual law dictates eternal consequences with the cold mechanics of gravity, even for those unexposed to the truth. We explored a heaven built on the transactional spiritual currency of a mother's 22,000 prayers, a realm where divine light casts no shadow and physical age is entirely a matter of psychological perception.
We looked at the purported spiritual physics of water memory, the profound emotional betrayal of Eve's pet serpent, the brutal historical mechanics of the crucifixion, and a sprawling, highly polarized, controversial map of modern geopolitics.
It is a story that demands an immense amount of processing from the listener, constantly challenging the boundaries of fundamentalist theology, the laws of physics, and the limits of human psychological endurance.
Which brings us to our final thought. Let's circle all the way back to where we started. The physical reality of a man lying on a basement bed for 3 hours, clinically, biologically dead.
Even if a listener approaches this entire account strictly from a secular, psychological, or neurobiological standpoint, dismissing the spiritual claims entirely, it still leaves us with a profound, lingering mystery to chew on. The human brain's theoretical ability to construct a seamlessly consistent, hyper-detailed, multidimensional reality spanning from the watery void of Genesis to modern Siberian sinkholes complete with complex theological frameworks, rigid spiritual physics, and deep emotional resonance, all while the body's systems are actively shutting down and deprived of oxygen, is staggering.
It really is. It forces us to ask the ultimate question: what is human consciousness actually capable of when the physical filters of the body are finally forcibly removed? Is it simply a dying brain firing off its last, most magnificent, desperate fireworks display of imagination to comfort itself in the dark? Or is it a window subtly opening into a vast, complex architecture that was always there, waiting just beyond the veil?
That is the defining question of the near-death experience, and it is a debate that science, philosophy, and theology will continue to wrestle with long into the future.
Definitely something to think about the next time you turn off the lights and your head hits the pillow.
Oh.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions, keep seeking knowledge, and we will catch you next time.